All right, good evening, everyone. I've got 7 o'clock. Today is Monday, August 26th, 2024, so we'll call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. We will get started with items from the City Attorney. Attorney Tamara Larison.
Thank you. Before you today is what I've been kind of foreshadowing for a while now, which is a review of the Criminal Code Part 5, General Offenses. So this review is mostly just updating some language that has changed in the ORC to reflect those changes in our code. There are 3 substantive areas that I wanted to highlight for you. The first I have mentioned before at council, which is the ethnic intimidation that I am proposing to broaden to encompass all of the various protections that we offer under other areas of our code, such as housing protections. And this is also reflective of language that other municipalities have approved and adopted. I wanted to point out that subsection B gives some examples of contextual clues that can point to a person's motive. Those are not all inclusive, so all of the categories of protections are listed in subsection A. And so subsection B is just how we would be able to determine motive from the totality of the circumstances. Also in this ordinance is making this offense a misdemeanor of the first degree instead of one level higher than the predicate offense, recognizing that this motivation and this kind of criminal behavior has its own harm in addition to whatever the predicate offense is. So I do believe that that would be appropriate. The other area is dissemination of an image of another. This has been a crime under the state statute since 2019, but was omitted from our city code. So just something that I noticed was, I believe, an oversight, so adding that in. And lastly is the update of our code to be compliant with the new passage of adult use cannabis. And so that is a bit of a large lift because there are several areas of code that this affects. The state legislature actually passed kind of a stopgap measure, which was the ORC chapter, but it did not go through each corresponding criminal offense and update that to reflect the inconsistent language. And so this is a first pass at making sure that our code is internally consistent and ensuring that we're not in any conflict of specifically authorized uses under the state statute. So again, this is a first pass. There'll be a second pass coming to you in the next 2 weeks at the next committee meeting, where I'll go back through in more detail and comb through the rest of our code. So this is just the first pass. So welcome to any questions or comments.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. Any questions, comments?
I'm still reading through it, not being an attorney.
Mr. Schnetzer.
Yeah, similarly, still trying to digest it, but I guess the one broad question I have is whether or not PD's had an opportunity to review and if they have any comments or input on this particular item.
I have discussed the broad categories of changes that I've been doing with Chief Spence and the department. They have not had a chance to redline this as it is, again, just a first pass. So okay. I would welcome them to give me their input also.
Perfect. I guess I would reserve any additional comments that I might have until I've had an opportunity to hear what PD thinks, since ultimately they'll be tasked with enforcing it.
So, City Attorney, is it your desire to have this come back to committee in 2 weeks then?
Yes.
All right.
I do have one question.
Yes, Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, thank you. City Attorney Tamara Larison, have other communities also created the ethnic intimidation or discriminatory intimidation? Have they established that as an M1 as well, or would this be unique?
Other communities have also established it as a misdemeanor of the first degree, notably Columbus, also, I believe, Reynoldsburg. And they have also included the enhanced list. Each community has done a different specific list of predicate offenses. They have all also continued to call it ethnic intimidation, even though it includes several categories. So we would be the first community to call it discriminatory intimidation, but the bulk of the language is mirrored in other communities in this area.
I'm sorry, did you say we'd be the first community to call it discriminatory intimidation?
Correct. We would be the first community to change the name itself, but the actual categories have been broadened in several communities.
Just from my perspective, and certainly also look to Department of Public Safety and the police for their input as well, but I appreciate the proposed amendments to the marijuana-related restrictions to bring us in line with issue 2 and what's going on at the state. So thank you. Thank you for your work on this.
Any additional questions or comments on this item? Barring none, we'll have this come back to committee in 2 weeks. Thank you, Madam City Attorney, for your efforts on this, and look forward to a healthy discussion in 2 weeks' time. All right. Next up, we have items from council office. Good evening, Deputy Clerk.
I'm gonna get set up here. Hi, so I'm here tonight to discuss a supplemental appropriation related to our grant project for digitization of our historic village records. Before I dive into the purpose for the supplemental, I wanted to give you an update on our grant project so far. So as I know I've updated you here and there, but thought this was a really great venue to share it, especially because it's very publicly accessible. I want to walk through how people can find the records that we've scanned so far and posted online. So for a little bit of background, back in April, Council Office was awarded $2,940 for digitization for historic records by the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board, also known as ORAB. In May and June, the records were scanned by ScanWorks, an Ohio business, and our intern, Charlie Schneider. And these records span 1881 to 1970. They include meeting minutes, ordinances, and resolutions from Gahanna when it was a village. We are currently at about the halfway point. Scanning is totally complete, and we now have over 20 years of historical Village of Gahanna council meeting minutes online. And by the end of 2024, we will have all of our village council meeting minutes on our legislative website. And in order to find these, you can go to gahanna.legistar.com. It will automatically direct you to this calendar page where we have all of our agendas and meeting minutes, not just the ones that I'm discussing tonight. Make sure that the Agendas and Minutes tab is selected. Scroll down a little bit and select all years. You can select individual years if there is something that someone from the public wants to research, maybe for 1902. The one caveat being that we're still working with the software to figure out how to add 1800s in there. So I recommend searching by all years for city council records. And you can organize by meeting date and make sure that that little caret is facing up so that we can view them from oldest to newest. Click on the Minutes tab or Minutes button, and then you will be presented with a high-quality PDF of the set of minutes for that particular date. So right now what we're looking at is a snippet of the very first Village Council meeting minutes from 1881. And next steps beyond this project. So the grant was awarded specifically to digitize and post these records online. But beyond this, we hope that maybe we can engage some public participation by doing some transcription, maybe some crowdsourced transcription, because as you know, not everyone will be able to read these. Screen readers certainly can't read these. OCRing, handwriting is extremely challenging, if not impossible. So that will be hopefully a project beyond the bounds of our grant project. Does anyone have any questions about the grant project before I bring up the supplemental?
Thank you, Ms. McGuire. Any questions or comments so far?
Okay.
Please continue.
So the purpose for the supplemental appropriation, we were awarded the grant itself in April of this year. However, we did not receive the funds until June, and we really wanted to kickstart that project to get it going and ensure that it could be completed in the time frame by the end of this year. So we went ahead and paid for the project from our budget. We received the funds, and now we need to be reimbursed with the grant funds to our professional services line.
All right, thank you, Deputy Clerk. Any questions or comments?
Quick comment.
Yeah.
Especially given that we are celebrating a milestone year for Gahanna, the 175th anniversary. I think it's wonderful that you and the office have made so much progress in this, in preserving historical records, and we really appreciate your diligence and commitment to preserving these records, so thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
This is really amazing. I guess, so where was this before you had it scanned?
These were hidden in offsite storage. When I started about a year and a half ago, we pulled all of our historical records, our record books, just to kind of see what we had, what condition they were in, and so on and so forth. There is a digitized copy of some of these. I will say, though, they were microfilmed, and then the scanned copy was created from the film. So it's black and white, it's really a degraded copy. So it's been really great for us, I think, to have a high-quality archival image of all of our oldest records from when Gahanna was a village.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much. I know as someone who's handled public records for my day job, there was a fire at the Franklin County Courthouse back in the early 20s, and pretty much everything was lost. And so people are looking for old property records. You're in tough luck because the fire wiped it all out. So it's really amazing being able to preserve these things for posterity. So thank you very much for your efforts on this. This is an ordinance, so on for first on the 3rd and then on consent on the 16th.
Sounds great.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have items from the Senior Director of Operations. Senior Director Schultz, good evening, sir.
I'll sit over here tonight so you don't confuse me as Heidi.
Do my best.
Good evening, folks. We are here in our second installment of all things SOPEC and all things community choice aggregation. Tonight, we're here to talk to you about the plan of operation and governance, which is the next step in actually the city of Gahanna realizing an aggregation program. Our friends from SOPEC have joined us tonight. Luke Suffridge, the executive director, and Philip Lepla, thank you, the deputy director and legal counsel for SOPEC. So when I get in over my head, we'll ask them to answer any more of the detailed questions that you folks might have. As you guys know, last week at council, you guys officially voted to become members of SOPEC. As you recall, SOPEC is a regional council of governments who provide energy aggregation programming for 29 communities throughout the state of Ohio. As previously discussed, they also have other programming that they do that is afforded to all of their members, and those were detailed in previous presentations. So what are we here tonight to talk about, right? We're here tonight to talk about, again, that next step in becoming their 30th community to implement or use them as service providers for an aggregation program. But basically, that next step is the adoption of their operation and governance plan. We're not here tonight to set rates. We're not here tonight to actually start a program. We're here simply tonight and over the next few meetings here, as we'll get to adopt the operation and governance plan. The actual plan itself is about a 15-page document. It is attached to the agenda. It's not difficult reading, and it's not difficult reading. But what does that plan do? So the plan, in its simplest terms, it indicates how an aggregation program is going to operate on behalf of the city of Gahanna. This is the same plan that all of their member communities that offer aggregation programming adopt. And the plan really outlines the structure, the governance, the operations, the management, the funding, and the policies that the member communities and participants of the program operate under. Right? The plan is also certified. It's important that the plan is certified by PUCO, the Public Service Commission of the state of Ohio. This is very similar to the plan that the city had adopted in 2000 when the aggregation program was first voted and first. It got through that initial step, basically the same exact step that we're at right now. But if SOPEC is going to provide aggregation services for us, we need to fall under their governance plan. So what are the goals and objectives of the plan, right? I think the plan itself outlines about 15 or 16 different goals and objectives. Here are some of the highlights, my opinion, the highlights. But basically, the number one goal is to leverage the bargaining power of the pool of customers that fall under SOPEC. So the 29, us being the 30th customer, to fall into this particular pool. To secure sustainable energy sources. But at the same time, the next goal there is to provide energy options for all qualified customers. The ability for customers to opt out of the program. We talked a lot during the RFI process about opt-out aggregation. Have added something in here, also opt-in, right? And we'll get to that in a couple seconds here. But for the ability for customers to both opt out and opt into our aggregation program, basically at any time past the initial opt-out period, which again we'll talk about here in a couple minutes. Ensure quality and reliable customer services provided, right? That is services that are not provided by city employees, but those are services that are provided by SOPEC and AEP Energy. Probably should have backed up, and you would notice on some of the other slides here that AEP Energy is the supplier, the electrical supplier that SOPEC is contracted with in order to provide energy to all of their aggregation communities. And then it also enhances or advances the economic and energy development goals, right? So through this type of program, we have the ability to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, so on and so forth, which we've talked about. We also have the ability to do other sustainability type initiatives through some of the other services that SOPEC offers as being offered to their membership. So when we talk about opt-out aggregation, right, this is the same exact slide with a couple modifications toward the bottom here, but opt-out aggregation, when the voters in the city of Gahanna in 2000 had voted for this type of program, it gave the city of Gahanna the ability to become a municipal aggregator and create an opt-out program. Right, so what is an opt-out program? Basically, an opt-out program is all. Sorry, this. All eligible accounts are entered into an opt-out program. Right, so residential accounts not participating with an alternate supplier. So the examples that I've given previously is that I already participate in the state of Ohio's Apples to Apples program. So I purchase my own supply from folks. I would not be eligible, or I would not be opted. I would not receive notice. Sorry, I would not receive notice of when the program begins, because I already have an alternate supplier. Sorry, I'm struggling there. But an opt-out program provides turnkey solutions for all participants. It potentially saves dollars on that supply dollar or that supply charge because of the increased buying power. But ultimately, right, and I think the most important part on this particular slide is the choice remains with the customer themselves, right? So what does that mean exactly, right? Every customer that would receive a note and is eligible for this particular program would receive a letter that indicates that they have the ability to opt out of this program and be returned to their default supplier, which in this instance is AEP Ohio, not to be confused with AEP Energy. Customers at the same time, they could choose to go to the state website and they can search for their own supplier, right? So that's the logo, the Energy Choice Ohio program. And inside of this particular slide, for anybody listening online, they'll be able to click that link and go directly there, or just go to Google and type in Energy Choice Ohio and you'll get directed to the website. Or they actually have the option to do nothing and be entered into the energy aggregation program as we started, right? So all notices will be provided, and we'll get to that here actually in the next steps. But what happens after these initial terms and these initial periods take place, right? So on the next slide, we get into some of the timing, but let's say we get past, like, we set a rate, we start a program, and a few months after that, I myself, right, I'm looking for a new electrical supplier, and I realize that the city of Gahanna offers a pretty good competitive rate, and I want to join their program. All I need to do is simply call the 1-800 number and ask to be added to the City of Gahanna SOPEC AAP Energy Aggregation Program, and I become part of that customer pool. There's no charge for that, and I can come in and out of the program as many times as I'd like. One of the things that's actually published on our website now under frequently asked questions, but questions to ask, right? Because when we look at this, ultimately, one of the things that we need to do is educate the consumer on what it is that we're doing, right? So some of the questions that you would ask, even if you were buying your own electrical supply from the Apples to Apples website, whether you were joining our program or whether or not you were just with AEP Ohio and you wanted to know how much you were currently being charged. These are some of the questions that customers, residents, if you would, should ask themselves when joining any program. Is the supplier offering fixed or variable rates? Again, this has nothing to do with, I'm not going to answer these questions right now, but these are questions, again, that the consumer should ask. What is the term of that contract? What is the current price to compare, right? On your bill right now, currently, you would see the price to compare, and we talked about that during the RFI process, so now you know what you're paying or what AEP is saying that you should be being charged versus what you are actually being paid. So then you'll have a good comparison as to whether or not you'll be saving money or potentially, right, potentially being paid, being charged more money. Are there early termination fees, or what are the other fees that are associated with any other supplier, right? So when I state these questions, these are, again, not under our program necessarily. There are no early termination fees. I stated that, right? But if somebody wants to join our program, they really need to understand and opt into our program. They need to understand whether or not their current supplier is going to charge them an early termination fee. Are there monthly fees associated with anybody that you may sign up with? And these questions are a little bit clearer in our FAQ on the website currently. So what is the aggregation program process, right? So we adopt as we go through time here, and the next slide is actually the next steps. But as we get closer to the next steps, and as we go through public hearings and such on this particular plan and plan adoption, we'll make the assumption that plan adoption happens. The next thing that happens is a customer list is provided to SOPEC and AEP Energy that basically says, these are all of the eligible customers inside of the City of Gahanna that are eligible to join our program. Eligible customers are notified. Once a rate is set and a program is going to begin, all eligible customers are notified by SOPEC and AEP Energy. I will note that there could be what I'm going to refer to as a big gap between the customer list being originally provided and us setting a rate and a program beginning. We'll get into some of those details on the next slide here. Customers requesting to be opt-out or removed from our program, and they're returned back to the default supplier, which again is AEP Ohio. The distribution utility then transfers all accounts to AEP Energy. And when I say transfers all accounts, remember, we're only dealing with the supply half of the utility bill. So that's the portion of the bill that is transferred to AEP Energy. And that is the only change that a ratepayer would end up seeing on their bill. Is the bill is going to look 100% the same, except under supply it's going to say AEP Energy is the supplier of your electric at this particular point. And the program then will become effective on the next full billing cycle, My note there in red at the bottom of the slide is that customers would have 21 days to opt out of our program and be returned to the default supplier. And that notice is delivered via the United States Postal Service. Ms. Bowers?
Yes. Just related to this, so what, if someone, let's say, didn't receive the letter and didn't otherwise know that this program was rolling out, they would become eligible or active in the program, and then, let's say they realize this on their first monthly bill, what would happen then? Or what could happen then if they didn't want to participate?
If they didn't want to participate, they, one of the things that I talked about on the previous slide, maybe 2 slides ago, they have the ability to call the 1-800 number and ask them to be returned to the default supplier. They can go and shop for their own electrical supplier all on their own through Apples to Apples website. Or they can realize the good rate that hopefully the city of Gahanna is offering them and stay inside of the program. So those are their 3 options.
Yeah, I don't mean to make you repeat yourself, but I
That's
just
all right.
think that it's an
Very
important point, that even if folks miss this initial opt-out period, they can still opt out at any time.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Depending on exactly what our term is when we set our rate, so on and so forth, they can opt in and out as long as we are under an existing contract as often as they like with no fees associated with those opt-in or opt-outs, as long as there's no fees on the provider in which they're leaving in order to come into our program.
Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schultz, quick question. There's been a lot of reference to AEP and the default rate. If someone, as of today, already has gone to Apples and has chosen a different supplier, whether it be, Dynegy, et cetera, do they still have to go through this opt-out program?
No, they will not receive notice because they will be one of the eligible customers notified by SOPEC and AEP Energy. They would not be eligible, and therefore they would not receive notice to opt out.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Padova.
Just to piggyback on that, if someone didn't receive notice because they were already in a program, if that program expires or they're able to get out of that program and want to get into ours, are they able to just call the city to do that? How would they go about doing that?
They call it a 1-800 number that'll be published that goes directly, I believe, to AEP Energy, and they just ask the customer service representatives to be added to the Gahanna program.
Okay, so anybody that would like to get into this program, if they are ineligible at the beginning, would still be able to do so whenever they want to,
Correct.
if they choose. Thank you.
Yes, yes, ma'am. All right, so one more slide, and then we can get into some more question and answers. But what are the next steps, right? So we're here tonight, and by ORC, we're required to host 2 public meetings as it relates to the adoption of this plan. So we're here to introduce the legislation this evening. First public hearing would be on September 3rd. No matter how much I tried on this particular slide to make it September 2nd, it needs to be Tuesday, September 3rd, the day after Labor Day. We have the opportunity for this to come back to committee on September 9th, if you guys so choose. So therefore, we can have additional conversation and discussion around the matter if necessary. And then on September 16th would be the second public hearing, and then ultimately a vote by you folks to adopt the plan and give us the ability to take the next step, which at that point would be to consult with our SOPEC friends and consult on when the best time it would be to set a rate, and actually have a program begin. With that, I'm able to take any questions. I will note that the other 2 council discussions, one for the RFI for the selection of SOPEC, and then SOPEC membership, are listed on this particular slide, along with the website that is direct link there to the Community Choice Aggregation Program, where there's a fair amount of information. The FAQ is there. There's a short video from our friends from PCFO, Power Clean Future Ohio. They just published that very recently. It's a very short 1-minute video that does, I think, a fairly good job of explaining what aggregation is. And there's some good resources there. I will also note, but we're also working with marketing and communications on exactly what that communication strategy looks like. But we can pretty much know that communication strategy from the city, this doesn't include the opt-out letter that's going to come from the SOPEC and AEP Energy folks, but that'll include a direct mail postcard basically announcing the program. social media campaigns, obviously saying that, hey, we're starting this, stay tuned, pay attention. Newsletters and alerts, and then obviously the website presence and the FAQs that I just talked about, with the hopes that folks who would like to be educated have the resources and materials at their fingertips. So they're making educated decisions about joining our program, opting out if you would, and/or going and shopping for their own supplier if they so choose. So with that, I can take any questions. And obviously, our friends from SOPEC are here, again, for when I get in over my head.
All right, thank you, Director. Any questions or comments? I saw Mr. Schnetzer first, then Jamil, and, okay, I'll make a list. Or then, Mr. Schnetzer, then Ms. Jones, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Mr. Schultz, again, thank you for the information. So just a bit of a process question. So I guess what's being asked of us is, after some public hearings, is I guess the act from council would be to enter the program, which would then authorize the administration in consultation with SOPEC to ultimately set the rate, right? I
Correct.
think that's kind of like where the rubber meets the road is this going to save people money or not? It's predicated on that rate, and we don't know that as of this moment, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jones.
Thank you. You mentioned, so AEP Energy, and a little different from the AEP that many of us already write checks to, had that question from a neighbor, wasn't really able to explain it in a eloquent way. So how can we easily break that down? What's different between the two? Would I still write my monthly bill to the same AEP? Do account numbers change? Do we not know that yet?
Customer that is joined into our energy aggregation program would see no changes to their bill. Their account is not going to change. Obviously, their service address isn't going to change. The person in which AEP Ohio they write the check to isn't going to change. They will see AEP Energy's logo under the supply portion of their bill, and it will indicate what the rate that they're paying for the supply of the energy becomes. But the bill will look 99% the same, with some smaller exceptions.
Thank you.
I will say, it was a little bit confusing to me. I was at the senior center last week talking about community aggregation with the mayor, and I pulled up my bill, and being that I'm on a budget and my bill stays flat for the entire year, it actually looks a little bit different, and it's not necessarily confusing. The information is all there, but it is a little bit different for somebody on a budget as opposed to somebody who's just paying the flat rate month to month.
Thank you.
Ms. Padova had a follow-up question to that.
So I might be really dumbing this down, for lack of other words, but would, what is it, AEP Energy and AEP Ohio? Would it be somewhat similar to like Walmart and Sam's Club?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Mrs. McGregor.
I guess one thing I know is that you mentioned a couple times, but it's really important that if people are on another plan, they pay attention when their contract ends.
Absolutely.
Because I missed it by a day or two and had to pay $100. So if you're on another plan, just reiterate, make sure you look at the date that you're eligible to change, and if there's a fee associated with that, because I got caught one time.
Correct, and that's why I did throw those questions up there earlier, because those are important questions for all customers to ask, regardless of which program they're on. You got charged the $100, right? But then also the rate goes up, and sometimes the rate goes up a lot more than you think that it's going to go up. It's well above the price to compare, and now you're losing savings as opposed to continuing in a program. That would not happen in our instance. That would not happen. And folks inside of our program, when we're doing our due diligence and contract periods end, and we continue them, right? We're continuing them for the pool, and these folks will keep track of when our term is going to end. So there is no lapse, and we're always dealing with the best rate as opposed to a rate that's a little bit off kilter. I will note just, maybe I'll save you guys a question, but there has been some conversation about the initial term that we would probably sign or think about signing, and I believe that the advice at this particular moment is likely to sign a bridge agreement, what SOPEC would refer to as a bridge agreement, to get us to June, when the good amount of their customer pool is also going, that's when a good amount of their current contracts expire. So we would actually be negotiating the next contract with a larger pool, and the theory being that we'd get a more competitive rate post-June. So
Do we know how many people are already in an alternate?
we don't.
Program?
That's once this gets adopted and they're able to get that list, they'll know that 60-70% of the residents in the city of Gahanna are eligible for the program. Maybe it's higher than that, maybe it's lower than that. But once the list is able to be delivered, they'll know. We know what the top number is. We just don't know what the who's currently buying their energy elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Renner?
Do you have a quick little question? When does the Gahanna page go live? Because it doesn't, when does the Gahanna information page go live? Because it doesn't resolve at the short URL.
If you throw a / on the backside of that URL, it will resolve.
Wait, say that again, a /. Yeah, it does. Okay.
So this is the site as it's up currently, edited this morning for currentness. Obviously, we're still coming soon because we're not quite there yet. Here's the SOPEC, or I'm sorry, the PCFO video that I spoke about. Again, just 1 minute long, does a very nice job of explaining what aggregation is. A couple questions about what aggregation is, what steps has Gahanna taken, what is opt-out community choice aggregation programming. All legislative actions that this body has taken and all presentations given are here, with the exceptions of the ones that are older. I think that would fit into Ms. McGuire's previous presentation, maybe. And then also the frequently asked questions here. If you click this view all button, I believe there's between 15 and 20 different questions that are in that FAQ. If for some reason there's some questions that aren't answered inside of there, you guys can just send us a note and we'll make sure that we add those in.
Can I just add, also an easy way to find it on the website is when you're on the home page, if you go under our government and initiatives, it says community choice aggregation. All you need to do is click that and you'll get directed right to that page.
I tried that and it didn't work for me.
Oh, that's, No, I have it. Went right there.
Just a quick,
Yeah, Ms. Barris.
just a very quick thank you, Mr. Schultz. Excellent presentation tonight. I think you've answered a lot of resident questions that have popped up in a very succinct way, and I really appreciate the build out on the website. Even just from this weekend, there's a lot of work that's gone into it that's gone live. So I'm really grateful for all the work that you and Mr. Weibensinger and the rest of the City Hall team have done on this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. It's my understanding that the plan is to be adopted as is presented, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And in there's a reference to a 2% carbon fee.
That is City of Athens only.
City of Athens only. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So I appreciate that. Anything else on this item for the time being? As Director Schultz indicated, we've got public hearings slated for the 3rd and the 16th. Any desire for this to come back to committee in between? I'm seeing none, so we'll anticipate the public hearing on the 3rd. Thank you very much, Director, and thank you to staff and the administration for all their efforts on this, and thank you to our colleagues from SOPEC for being here this evening, for all your efforts as well.
Sweet. Thank you, folks.
Thank you very much. Okay, lastly, we have items from the Senior Director of Administrative Services. Good evening, Director Volmer.
Okay, that's fine. Good evening.
I'm here this evening to introduce Heidi Miller from Clemens Nelson. She'll be representing Clemens Nelson and giving us the update on the staffing plan. If you'll recall, the 5-year staffing study and plan was appropriated in the 2024 budget. The city engaged Clemens Nelson and Associates to conduct this staffing study. Ms. Miller will go over the methodology and the recommendations for the staffing study. As a reminder, this is a 5-year fluid plan. We are asking for adoption by resolution, and we plan to use the recommendations from the staffing study to build out the 2025 staffing request, which will come on October 21st with the 2025 budget. I'm going to pass it over to Heidi, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Perfect, thank you. Is this on? Can everybody hear
Good
me
evening.
okay? Okay, perfect. So bear with me because I'm kind of flipping through what's on the screen and then what's here in front of me as well because I have a lot of notes. So to start, I just want to go over our background and methodology for the staffing study. And as part of that, basically, one of the first steps that we did was to really gain the understanding of the city of Gahanna. We looked at things like the budget books, we read comprehensive plans. That was a major component to this study, was kind of just understanding what's going on currently and how things are structured and put together was step one. And then step two was that we did interview with each individual department leader. That was done to just gain an understanding of each department, know what current staffing looked like, what were the goals, the needs, those sorts of things. Another major component in this is that we also collected data from comparable cities. Typically for Gahanna, that's going to be your local municipalities that are in the area to see what they are doing as well. And we also looked at the gaps and overlaps in functions. We looked at span of control. And then basically we looked at the work practices and just tried to identify ways to not only, look at staffing, but what are some ways to kind of streamline the work efforts as well. And I do want to say just a couple of things. So, these recommendations, as Miranda said, they are for the next 5 years. It's not outlined in a manner that in 2025 you should do this, in 2026 you should do this. It's more so guidelines for you all on here is what we're seeing, here is what the city's doing now, and here's where we think it could go. And those are kind of in line with the city's intent to continue to grow as well. The other thing, the other thing that I wanted to add too is that there's obviously a lot to cover tonight. There is, so in the report, if you've seen it, it's a very lengthy report, but it does have the narrative for the what and the why, basically. So if there's, anything that you're kind of questioning or you have, you're like, where's the backup information to this, you're likely going to find it in that report. And that's going to be where all the comparable data is, all of that information. So how I intend to do this is basically go department by department and just walk through and kind of summarize what our ultimate recommendations were. And then I am going to kind of, if I'm going at a pace where you need me to slow down so you can ask a question, please just stop me and feel free to interrupt at any time, okay? So to start, we'll start with economic development. Basically, the rundown on this is that the department is appropriately staffed at this time. It is a relatively new department, and what I mean by that is that the makeup of the staff is relatively new. So there's really just a focus on developing the current staff right now. Also looking at comparables, it is structured very similar to those around you. The director did indicate a need for somebody who could do these things that I've added up here, which is research, compile data, and investigate trends. So with that, we have recommended an intern to the Economic Development Department. And then this is a visual of the recommendations. I do have a table of organization for each department as we move through here. Okay, so for engineering, again, so with this one, we haven't recommended any additional positions to the engineering department directly. One of the things that I did want to bring up this evening, though, is when we were meeting with department leaders, both on the engineering side and public service side, they both had shared concerns basically between kind of some gray areas and some things where it was a little bit unclear as to who was doing what or why certain departments were doing certain things. And then it was also kind of stressed that, you know, the departments are having to be more reactive than proactive. So that is something that I definitely wanted to share, because as we get into public service, we're going to kind of tie back to engineering. So I thought I would bring that up now, because there will be some recommendations in public service that will kind of take care of some of those issues. Another thing that came up in engineering as well was geographic information systems. So this is currently engineering does some of the GIS functions, and then also IT does as well. So you kind of have two departments doing similar roles. And it was stressed that it's a lot for, you know, one position in one position in engineering to handle. So again, that will later be addressed as well. The one thing I want to point out, going back to my other point too, that I forgot to mention, is that as part of that, the lacking piece really between engineering and public service, what we landed on is that there was really a person that could do the compliance and reporting, kind of the project management piece. That was the piece where it would kind of had gotten gray. So just wanted to point that out as well, so I don't forget later on. Okay. So then that's our table of organization for engineering. So no changes again to staff. Okay, so then for finance, again, we have not recommended any additional positions. This was also kind of a relatively new team, where, again, the focus was on developing this team and getting them up to where they need to be. There is plans for an upcoming retirement of one of the finance analysts, which it worked out because one of the things that came up was that currently you have the senior deputy director with other city employees who's kind of handling the RFP and procurement process. And so basically it's kind of a, lack of better words, a hodgepodge that kind of lacks consistency. So really trying to find a position that could take ownership of that process. And so with the retirement of the one finance analyst, what we've recommended is that, because there's two, so what we've recommended is that one be responsible for the accounts payable and receivable, and then the other one take on the RFP and procurement. But again, that's not any additional positions, that's just kind of moving some functions around. The other thing that we've just included in the report is that the payroll analyst currently, so during the winter season or the off season, is supporting about 200 employees, and then during the summer busy season, that number basically doubles. So just providing that individual a backup person, whether that be another finance analyst, an HR representative, just somebody who can provide that support should that employee be out, you know, want to take vacations, those sorts of things. And then that is the table of organization for finance. Okay, human resources. So for this one, we have also not recommended any additional positions. One of the things that we looked at were, or at least it's always nice when you can get a statistic that says you should have this many employees for this many, you know, and HR is one that we get that statistic. The Society for Human Resources Management puts out how many HR employees you should have for the number of employees you have in your organization. And so I was able to determine based on that statistic, which it's 1 per 100, that staffing-wise, the department is solid. Obviously, that's something that needs to be monitored if staffing does increase over time, but that's not going to be anything that I think you all have to worry about in the next 5 years. We did look at as well, we analyzed whether or not the HR manager, if that should be a director level position. Ultimately determined that the structure of the city and the number of employees does not support having both. But I did ultimately recommend that the HR manager take on the labor relations functions as much as, that position's able to. And then lastly, so one of the things that I'll be talking about here shortly is, so I will be recommending a training coordinator in the Department of Administrative Services. And that is going to impact HR because currently there is an HR representative that does the training functions. And that those functions, the training and compliance will move to that new position that I've recommended. But HR is going to still remain responsible for kind of identifying what those HR training topics should be. So I wanted to point that out as well. So this is the table of organization for HR. Okay, so we do have a bit here for IT. So for IT, there's a few positions here. So one of the first ones, and I'm sure all of you know, cybersecurity, especially in the public sector, has become a pretty big threat. I think even us in the private sector, we are feeling it too. And one of the positions that we're starting to see really kind of get added and blow up, if you will, are these security type positions that are designated specifically to the security of your IT systems. And this was also a shared concern with the IT manager, that she, didn't feel like you guys were able to be proactive with this. So we have recommended a security network analyst for the IT department. The other thing is that we are recommending a systems analyst for the IT department. The systems administrator has a pretty heavy workload, and obviously there's an intent that you will continue to kind of with the new facility that you're going to have some modernization, some new technology, so that need is going to grow as well. So we've recommended a systems analyst. Going back to engineering, when I had brought up the GIS. So what we've recommended in IT is a GIS analyst. So this position would not only support IT, but would take those functions that are being performed in engineering and absorb those as well. That kind of gives that consistency in one department rather than it kind of being spread in different areas. And so that position will take on those functions as well. And then lastly, so one of the things that came out of this was whether or not the IT manager should be the IT director. We did, at our request, conduct a job audit of that position. I didn't want to make a determination without doing that and determine that the position should in fact be reclassified to director of IT based on what those job functions are that she's currently performing. And so that has been one of our recommendations as well as a result of this. And then that is the updated table of organization. So this one does, so just to kind of clarify, since this is our first one to have changes, the orange is going to be anything new. If you see gray, it's a reclassification, so it's not necessarily an addition. Okay. So the mayor's office. We obviously have some different components in there. A big focus for the mayor was the communications and marketing piece of it, kind of looking at where that fell, what the responsibilities were, what we felt could be missing. One of the first things that we noticed was, kind of a lack of a position that ultimately can be more like hands-on in the department, somebody to really oversee that department. And so we have recommended a director of communications versus a communications manager. The other piece in this is that we've recommended a digital media specialist. Now, this is one where, this is another position where I'm seeing a lot of the comps have a similar role. And obviously that's because we all know how important digital media is at this point, how heavily it's used. And so, and really the Parks Department alone has a lot of demands and the need for this role. So that is why we have recommended that position. Under the mayor is also the Department of Operations. And so one of the things that I learned about as going through this process was learning about MORPC's Sustainable 2050 program. And that, you know, there's different things that you all have to do as being part of that program. And so to kind of help the city, you know, meeting those requirements, and then also kind of helping with like various energy, natural resources, and sustainable neighborhood objectives, we've recommended a sustainability coordinator. And that is what that org chart would look like. So again, the 2 additions and then the director as a reclass. So for the Department of Administrative Services, I already somewhat touched on the training coordinator position. So this is kind of looking ahead a little bit to the new office space and the fact that there is going to be this new kind of state-of-the-art training facility that is going to need to be managed. And then on top of that, we have you have kind of your risk management and safety administrator, you have HR, and then you have police, who's all kind of managing training right now and coordinating and determining who needs what. So the idea with this training coordinator is to streamline those, basically have one position. Now, it would be our goal, because obviously police, that is a heavy lift on the training side. So it would be the intent to have the training coordinator kind of be a 50-50 split between police and then the rest of the city. And also looking to the future as a position that can kind of increase those revenue opportunities with those outside entities with the training facility as well. And then so as a result of the training coordinator, it kind of trickles down, because where we've positioned that, I'll flip over here, is having the training coordinator report to the risk and safety administrator. And so because that position would then kind of fall into a supervisory role, adjusting the position title to a manager versus administrator. So again, that's a reclass, not an addition.
Can I pause you for just a moment, Ms.
Yes.
Miller? I think you, under the HR section, hinted at it a little bit, but can you explain a bit further the logic of having the training coordinator sort of absorb some of those functions and move to DAS versus having the training coordinator remain with HR? Or be a role in HR, I should say.
It's kind of because it's kind of touching all of the different departments is my thought process. And it's really because, so you already have, the other thought is you have the risk and safety administrator who already is handling a lot of, from a safety standpoint, training as well. So it's to kind of give somebody who can oversee that role. So that's really the thought process behind it, because I'm really just trying to kind of get everything into one area versus being in all of these different areas and kind of creating inconsistencies.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Planning department, rather easy, and really not a whole lot to discuss here. So there's no additional positions being recommended. And I apologize, my table of organization looks like it got out of whack there. For the law department or office, we have not recommended any additional positions, although we have just recommended that if there is a tracking system that can be developed to kind of keep track of work assignments, requests, that can kind of help determine in the future if there's a need for additional staff. And then for council office, we have not provided any recommendations for additional positions. And then same with mayor's court. Okay, so now a couple big ones. save the best for last, right? So we've got Parks and Recreation. So with this one, what we have recommended is let me start with this. So right now, there's a Parks and Facilities Superintendent, and that position basically oversees facilities, golf course, parks, forestry. It's quite a large span of control. So what we have recommended is that there be a parks manager, and I'll show you this visually so that you can see it. But that position will oversee those divisions. And then from there, you have, it's that trickle-down effect, right? So then you have your Parks and Facilities Superintendent, who will then just have the responsibility for truly parks and facilities. Golf course from there being reclassified to a golf course superintendent and overseeing the golf course, and then forestry supervisor reclassified to a forestry superintendent. And basically all of this is kind of being done, especially Parks and Recreation as a whole. What we're recommending is really just trying to be in line with the Parks Master Plan that's been established, and working towards achieving those goals in that plan. And so this is one additional position, and the rest basically reclassifications, at least in this section. And then for forestry and horticulture, so right now the two are essentially lumped together. What we're recommending is that the city establish a horticulture division, so you'd have forestry, you'd have horticulture, and then, of course, to kind of keep with that similar structure that you have across the department, you would have to add a horticulture/tree foreman, because the intent would still be to have the two departments work together, so that way they can support, because the horticulture, although there is enough work there to support year-round, it does get heavier in the summer. It would get lighter in the winter, so just to kind of have the two working back and forth together. And then adding 2 maintenance workers as well to support. And again, this all goes kind of with the plan of growing that department. I'm going to skip really quick because I want to show you. It's going to be hard to see up there, and I apologize because there was a lot of positions to fit into this screen. But you can see there on the right, that's where that forestry superintendent would be, and then you can see the horticulture division is where those orange positions are, and then forestry separates out there as well to the right. So that is what that would look like, and then you can see the parks manager overseeing all of those positions. And then just to go back for a second, we've recommended that, just to continue to monitor as far as the number of maintenance workers that are needed, to ensure that those are staffed appropriately. And then the second thing is so one of the things that did come up is that Parks and Recreation and Public Service are both responsible for mowing and upkeep of property to some degree, to some level. And again, I'm all about the streamlining and trying to get things into one place. And so we've recommended that the mowing and upkeep be the responsibility of Parks and Recreation only, but it does not mean that there would be a reduction of employees in Public Service, just to be clear on that. Okay, so then for public service. So going back to my point from the very beginning of the presentation, with the engineering department and kind of those gray areas, where there was needing some clarity on who was performing these compliance and reporting functions and the project management. And so currently there is a position, the operations manager, that is in the department, but it has sat vacant for some time. And my recommendation has actually been to reclassify that position, so it kind of pulls it down a little bit, to be a project manager, with the hopes that this position will address those concerns between engineering and public service. And again, that position having the responsibility to oversee projects, manage contracts, and do those compliance and reporting functions. So that is where I have addressed that concern here in public service. The other additions that we have recommended are 2 maintenance workers one for, I have to make sure I say this correctly, 2 total, but kind of splitting between utilities and the streets division. And then we have also recommended a fleet division, or an administrative assistant to the fleet division to kind of assist with the functions, cataloging, inventory, purchasing, those sorts of things. Now, a big one here, so as a result of the new building, and I don't want to just say that, but basically with a new facility, being more modern, we have recommended that the city have a facilities department or division, and where we've recommended that fall is in public service. And with that, basically, we've recommended a facility superintendent. And again, this keeps in line with your current structure and kind of how it's laid out across the city. We've recommended maintenance workers and then custodians. So those maintenance workers would do your true maintenance tasks for that building, and then custodians would do the cleaning tasks, the upkeep, those sorts of things. And so the facility superintendent being the one to obviously oversee the division and be responsible for those day-to-day operations, making sure it's a safe facility. And then your 2 maintenance workers. So the justification for the 2 is that basically, again, the statistics, I like when we can point to something. So it's 1 full-time maintenance employee per 50,000 square feet is what the research recommends. Now, there's obviously things to consider in this number, safety, what the facility is needed for, the assets that need to be maintained. And because there's already a facilities foreman that could fill one of those gaps, I've recommended the two maintenance workers. And again, for the custodian, the statistic is 1 custodian per 28,000 square feet. So that would really result in 4 to 5 custodians for the city. But noting that, again, this research, things to consider are the nature of the space. And I think pointing out, office space, when we're looking at the statistic, office space versus elementary school, right? One's going to require more than the other. And so just something to think about, too, as those decisions are made. So this is the table of organization for public service. And you can see here, I have those 2 maintenance workers there on the bottom, and then we have the administrative assistant, and then your facilities division right there, kind of off to the right there. Okay. All right, so lastly, to wrap this up, is our public safety department. To kind of jump into this, so the office so it has 3 divisions, and then there's a communications center, and then there's also a compliance and accreditation manager, and those are all lumped under 1 deputy chief. Our comps would suggest, typically that there's either 1 per division, and so like I said, we have 1 per 3 subdivisions, or 1 to 2, and they have multiple lieutenants who are doing those functions. So we have recommended adding a deputy chief of police. The training piece, so this is going to tie back to that training coordinator that we've put in Department of Administrative Services. So again, this is, I guess, not new information here. And so really this person, again, trying to increase revenue opportunities, work with external entities, obviously coordinate the internal training, and that's the intent for that role. And then so one of the other things that we have is that you currently have, so you have basically 12 communication technician spots. Out of those 12, 1 communications technician 2, who's basically the supervisor, is overseeing all of the communications technicians, all of the shifts. And so we've recommended for the time being to at least reclassify or promote one of those communications technician ones into a 2. And then hopefully eventually you could get somebody on the 3rd remaining shift as well. So then that way you have a supervisor level position overseeing each of the shifts. And then, whoops. There is anticipation of, not anticipation, it is happening, that basically the school is going to be expanding, and because of that, there could be a need for an additional school resources officer. But basically, we've just recommended not necessarily giving a number on what we think that should be, but working with the school district to kind of determine what their needs are after that expansion, and determine what the needs are for a school resources officer. With the at the new building, there's going to be a property room, and with that, it's going to have updated technology and capabilities to store evidence. So we have recommended 2 full-time evidence technicians. There is also, so on the, from a civilian side, there's a need for a position that can assist with the records functions, and kind of being responsible for handling the public records requests. And especially with the video footage, it's gotten a lot more complex. And so there are more public records requests, and so to have somebody fulfill those. And then lastly, I don't know, I shouldn't say lastly, but adding a part-time management analyst to assist with background investigations. Yeah, it wasn't lastly, so I apologize. Almost there, though. The other thing that we recommended, so right now there is currently 1 community liaison officer. I skipped pages. Oh, there it is. And so this position has really become a position that has growing expectations, growing responsibilities. And so, and there are 3 kind of different districts that this position supports. And so it is recommended to add a CLO, and then, in the future, if able, kind of doing a CLO per division. But for now, the 1. And then so if you did decide to move forward with adding a deputy chief, also adding an administrative assistant to be able to support the deputy chief, and then also support any other patrol operations and investigations. And then the last recommendation, this truly is the last one, is that to monitor needs for other civilian staff like management analysts. And then that is, their table of organization's a bit different because of how they structure theirs. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say harder to follow, but basically, if you have, it's the yellow positions are kind of the higher priority, and then the purple is the, I don't want to say lesser priority, but, that they're looking further into the future, I think is a better way to say that. So that's kind of the color coding up there. Any questions for me?
Thank you, Ms. Miller.
I just threw a lot at you.
No, thank you very much for the presentation. One thing I'll note is this will be coming back to committee in about a month on the 23rd for additional questions, comments, feedback. So I might suggest if there's preliminary questions, we can do those now, but I imagine folks want some time to digest everything, and since this will be coming back to committee, we can also take those then as well. But that said, any questions, comments, discussion from my colleagues? Ms. Padova.
So I just want to make sure that I understand this chart correctly. So the yellow is what you're recommending, like the most immediate?
I'll say higher priority.
Okay.
I don't want to put a timeline on it, but
Yeah.
I'd say higher priority, yeah.
Okay, and then the purple is,
Further into the future.
okay, and then the blue,
That's current right now.
okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
guess I would ask the administration, I know when it came to the budget last year, there was a discussion in terms of asking the administration to prioritize which roles. Will that be coming at budget season, or
Yeah,
should I
so
make that request now that we can get that for budget season?
we'll include the 2025 staffing request similar to last year with higher priorities and 1As, 1Bs type thing, like we did last year, yes.
Anything else on this item for this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll have this come back to committee on September 23rd. All right, anything else for the committee of the whole this evening? All right, seeing nothing further, we'll adjourn committee. Thank you, Ms. Miller. Thank you, Director. Have a good evening, everyone.